Hey, everybody, welcome to tonight's Must Read Alaska podcast. I am guest host Rick Whitbeck, jumping back into one of my favorite topics tonight, energy. And specifically, we're going to talk with two candidates for this year's Chugach Electric Association Board of Directors election cycle. First of all, we have Mr. Todd Lindley. Say hi, Todd.
Hello, everybody.
And then Mr. Michael McManamon. Hey, Michael, say hi to everybody.
Hello, everyone.
These two gentlemen have stepped up and are running for board seats on the Chugach Electric Board. I cannot thank them enough for doing so. It is always a grind to go through this process, and I am glad that we are going to get a chance to sit down with these two fine gentlemen and have a little bit of time to talk about some of the issues facing Chugach and all of our ratepayers tonight. Reminder, ballots are going out for this election on April 29th. So sometime that 29th, 30th, or the 1st, you should have a ballot in your mailbox or in your email. Voting will continue through the annual meeting, which it takes place on May 29th. That starts with an open house from 1 to 4 p.m. and the annual meeting, where election results will be noticed and announced, begins 5 p.m. at Change Point Church over there off of Raspberry by Minnesota, the biggest church in Anchorage. Can't miss it. The old seafood processing plant that now is a bastion of amazing conservative Christian values during the week, and the Change Point host for the Chugach Electric Board open house and annual meeting here on May 29th. So I figure we'll start with Todd, since I know this is part of his DNA. He's been involved in the last couple of elections from helping other candidates. So Todd, say hi to everybody and give us 60, 90 seconds about who you are and why you're running for the board seat.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. I appreciate you taking the time to host here tonight. So, for those of you that do know me or maybe don't know me, my name is Todd Lindley. My background is in mechanical engineering. I've got 17 years working in the oil and gas industry, whether that's onshore or offshore. I've spent some time working across the lower 48, up here in Alaska on the North Slope. I spent a little bit of time over in Russia. And then recently, I had about 4 years working on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, doing various bits of design and project management. So my experience kind of extends from rotating equipment and facilities engineer to turnaround planning to gas planning and scheduling, dealing with a lot of things kind of in the upstream and the midstream space. So especially when we start talking about Cook Inlet, there's some things that are pretty relevant to the background that I have that I think could be of good use here for Chugach Electric. As you mentioned, I ran in 2024. 2025, I took a little bit of time off as the little one was born in April of that year, so I was a little bit focused somewhere else. But I'm going to give it another go here.
So.
Absolutely. I'm going to give it another go here in 2026. So thank you.
Absolutely. You and I served on Mayor Bronson's and Mayor Machicki's Cook Inlet task force on coming up with the best solution for basically South Central residents. And I always appreciated your insight on that. And I hope that people get an opportunity to listen to your answers tonight. Somebody I just met really just within the last few minutes, but I've liked what I've seen so far. Michael McManamon. Michael, give everybody here on the Must Read Alaska podcast a quick glimpse into your life and what led you to run here for the board.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with everybody. His name's Mike McManamon. Working currently at Santos and really seeing value in reaching out and helping Chugach Electric Association on their board of directors to really help shape the future of Alaska. There's a lot of opportunity here, a lot of resources. We're currently working on getting some more oil out of the North Slope and getting that rolling and transporting it down south here. We have some challenges at CHA with generation, LNG. Most of our generation is on natural gas. There's a lot of resources that are in play there. I think I can use my experience not just with Santos, but I have a decade working at the illuminating company, First Energy, down in Ohio in the lower 48. So I kind of got my knuckles busted, got a lot of experience there on the generation, the transmission, working on not just coal-fired plants, but LNG, nuclear as well, and the challenges that come in with transporting that electricity across the state lines.
That's awesome. Good to have you running for the board. Good to have you part of the Pika project, and those 80,000 barrels a day that'll start flowing here in the next couple months are going to be a welcome addition to Alaska's energy mix. So good for you at Santos for doing what you guys are doing. All right, gentlemen, let's get into the questions and give these guys here listening to the podcast on Must Read Alaska an opportunity to learn a little bit more about where your priorities and thoughts lie on the following topics. Chugach Electric is one of three parties responsible for addressing the impacts of the Eklutna hydroelectric project on fish and wildlife habitat. Because the Eklutna hydroelectric project infrastructure doesn't release water, there's a fight over wild salmon and wild salmon migration. Right now, they're unable to migrate through the majority of the river system. Do you support river restoration with fish passage to the lake and adequate flows in the Eklutna River in order to support the revitalization of wild salmon for the benefit of native village of Eklutna and area residents? And if so, how should Chugach move towards making that a reality? We'll start with Michael this time. Go ahead there, sir.
Thank you. Fish ladders, pump storage. There's already discussions in place on ways that this can be accomplished. In general, I do want to see the river revitalized, the salmon back where they used to be. Not by taking out the dam, but there's alternatives to make things the way that they really should be. Studies are in place, and the ball is in motion already. Let's take a look at what options we have, get all the stakeholders around the table, and work out the best route forward.
Okay, sounds good. Todd, how about you?
Yeah, when it comes to the Eklutna Dam project, I very strongly support what the owners of the project was doing. This was doing a lot of the river testing, the portal valve work, and I thought that was a pretty thoughtful way of approaching the problem, considering that a lot of the evaluation that had been done over the last several years really didn't show maybe an appreciable change in the fish habitat like most of the people really were after. Many of the solutions that were provided were quite expensive. I mean, there was one out there that said we're going to build an entirely new river to go around the dam so that the salmon could get into the lake. And that's just getting outside of the realm of reality. One of the things I think when we're looking at this whole Eklutna Dam problem is, especially when we start comparing it to other renewables that are here in the area. And I have to say, I've got to correct myself while I'm here talking about the topic, is in my column that I had given to the Watchman, where I had noted where Eklutna Dam back during the 2024 cold snap was up and powering and rolling and giving everything that it was doing, and Fire Island had failed. Fire Island didn't necessarily fail. We had some really good people at Chugach that gave me some good information that said, we were producing at 32% of its capacity factor, but that was still half of what the Eklutna Dam was. But the point I was trying to make is, during that time when we needed all these energy sources, the Eklutna Dam was there pumping away and doing exactly what it needed to do. Yet we had days where Fire Island wind, the capacity factor was almost nothing. And so when we needed that power, it wasn't available to us the same way that the dam was. And I didn't see anybody protesting what we should do to remove the Fire Island wind project.
Yeah, I remember that cold snap because I think I wrote about it in a previous job, right? There was literally 1% capacity factor on the coldest day of the year. And the 2 days around that, on the one on the front end, one on the back end, was 0.8 and 2.1. So I get that the 2-week window, it produced a third of what it could have. But the 3 coldest days of the year, when there was absolutely zero wind, it produced like an average of 1% capacity factor. So, Yeah, the Eklutna Dam and the Eklutna solution and the Eklutna hydroelectric project is vitally crucial to
Yep.
South Central Alaska because it's dispatchable, always on, and always available. So I
Hmm.
appreciate the fact you guys are interested in looking at solutions as long as we don't defeat the purpose of that dam by trying to rip it out like so many NGOs and activists want to see happen.
Yes, sir.
All right, 2023 strategic plan that was going through 2027 states that Chugach Electric will, and I quote, reduce its carbon intensity in metric tons of carbon dioxide per megawatt hour by at least 35% by 2030 and at least 50% by 2040 using 2012's numbers as a baseline year without a negative material impact on Chugach member rates, unquote. Do you agree with the goals and timelines as stated in the strategic plan? Do you have policy and project suggestions for how continued emissions reductions can be achieved? I cannot wait to hear these answers. We'll start with you, Todd.
I think very simply, my answer is no, I don't agree with these goals. I think we are shooting for a target that's unrealistic because most of these carbon reduction, carbon intensity goals are chasing something that frankly we don't have any control over. And when we start to look at what these things are doing, especially by the very simplest metric of carbon intensity, is it's the tons of CO2 divided by the unit of production. So just on the math alone, as if you increase production, you're going to lower your carbon intensity. But a lot of the solutions that we've been talking about is focused on the numerator of that, which in reality, what they're saying is we need to spend a whole lot of money to try to eliminate the carbon reduction, but it really doesn't change anything for you. We're going to end up driving these costs through the roof anywhere around the world where we've attempted to do carbon reduction through decarbonization policies. The prices have gone up and we've suffered in the way of reliability. So, in terms of policy, when we start looking at these things, we need to look at things that are actually going to drive the power in the opposite direction. So, are we going to be putting in power that's going to do what it says it's going to do? I mean, we just talked about Eklutna Dam. And if we start peeling back the layers on these policies of decarbonization, where does that stop? I mean, we're talking about land use, we're talking about the construction, the concrete, any number of things. And it just has no endpoint. And all it does is it just stifles creativity and ingenuity, which at the end of the day, those things alone are going to drive emissions lower because as we improve the technology, we're naturally going to get to the point where we're producing energy much more efficiently.
Yeah, Michael, I welcome your thoughts, and then I have a thought of my own, but I'm going to let you fire away first.
Boy, Todd's really summarized it excellently there. Increasing efficiency is going to materially reduce the carbon footprint. Now, reducing waste and pollutants is always a good and noble goal, but that does come with a cost. Whether you're putting scrubbers or putting in more efficient generation systems, um, there's some nickel and dimes there that we need to take a look at and how we're going to account for those. So there is a cost, whether that's a material cost, and that one's kind of up for debate. But I think our goal here really is to increase efficiency, but taking a look at reducing carbon, what is our real goal there? Carbon's a necessary element for growing trees and plants. We can't cut it out of our environment completely. So it's something that we really need to ask. What are our true goals and targets here?
Yeah, I think so. Here's my first of all, guys, great answers. I think that should align with most rational members of Chugach Electric's ratepayer base. The the goals that the board threw out, right? Todd, you put it best, right? We're looking at by any means necessary, and when they put that out in 2023, it was basically looking at Biden era green energy solutions, right? Intermittent wind, intermittent solar,
Mm-hmm.
to add in to the mix. The problem with that is it's intermittent. and it was highly based on subsidization that
Hmm.
Trump then came in and wiped out. And so a lot of those projects that they were looking at, Susitna wind and additional solar, and some of the I'll call them mega projects for integrated power producers, are no longer in play because they were never viable without gigantic federal government subsidies. So now that
Yeah.
that's back in play, again, rational thought needs to, or out of play, rational thought needs to come back into play. And hopefully, with you guys on the board can have discussions about dispatchable, always on power in the form of additional hydro, clean coal, and I say clean in quotes, because coal is coal, and that AKLNG line, right? So,
Yeah.
and finding more in Cook Inlet. So there's, we'll talk more about that, I'm sure. Bradley Lake, again, always on, and I know we'll get to that. All right, guys, appreciate you letting me throw my thoughts in on that. Anything that I said that you guys want to comment on before we go to the next question?
What I would say is when you were talking about clean coal there, real quick, just to kind of point out an obvious hypocrisy in this plan. If we were serious about meeting this target, there would be no question about signing on to be a partner with the Terra Energy Coal project. I mean, they have coal with carbon capture. It provides a path to be able to meet decarbonization goals, but yet I've not seen anything that says Chugach Electric is supportive or partnering up in a meaningful way to make this coal plant a reality. So it just goes to show that we're not serious about it, because if we were, this would be one of those projects that would be a game changer in multiple realities. And then plus, the largest emitter on the planet is China. They installed 1,700 megawatts of power of coal last year, and only one of those plants was CCS. So again, if we're talking about decarbonization and things like that, our enemies are looking at us and they're saying, well, they're just going to go ahead and put themselves in a position to not actually solve the problem while we are.
Anything, Michael, before we head out to the next question?
Oh, absolutely. We can't rely on subsidies to balance our books. So, um, need to kind of push that one to the side. Sure, it's great if we can get it, and it's nice for matching funds, but not for continuous operations.
I think
Uh,
I think the president has slammed the door on that, thankfully. So,
This next segment is sponsored by 7 Weeks Coffee. Good coffee is something we can all enjoy, and even better when the coffee you buy goes to a good cause. The name comes from the size of the developing baby at 7 weeks, the size of a coffee bean, and the first time a heartbeat is clearly detectable. Their mission is to fund the pro-life movement one cup of coffee at a time. They provide you with the world's best specialty coffee. To give you an idea of this, it's mold and glyphosate free, comes from organic and regenerative farming practices. Not only is it good coffee, but they donate 10% of every sale to pro-life pregnancy center care centers across the nation, which amounts to over 50% of their profits. Together with Must Read Alaska and 7 Weeks Coffee, you can make a real difference, one cup at a time. So go to their website, 7 Weeks Coffee, that's SEVEN weekscoffee.com, and use the promo code MRAK for 10% off your purchase. The link will be included in the show notes.
hey guys, according to the Alaska Department of Natural Resources Division of Oil and Gas, and I think every newspaper, every radio program, everything over the last few years, Cook Inlet natural gas supplies will fall short of demand starting next year. Rail belt utilities will need to import LNG to make up for this shortage. The utilities' own consultants are projecting that LNG imports will be at least 50% more expensive than current Cook Inlet gas prices. How would you propose using natural gas for meeting both the short-term and long-term energy needs in the rail belt? And what expertise do you bring to this situation? Michael, let's start with you.
Thank you. We're really going to have to rely on our experts and really the supply and demand ratio here. Um, we really just need to take a look at what the cost of the LNG coming in is. And when that hits a threshold, we're really going to have to take action, whether it's short term, long term. The price goes up, that means we're running out of supply. Demand's greater than what we can provide, whether it's for rural heating or for electrical generation. That number is going to be pretty close on both sides of the fence there. So when it hits this particular threshold, we're going to have to start importing to keep generation reliable, whether that's bringing LNG in via truck, rail, ship, um, or other options. We have the AK LNG pipeline. I think we can look at that possibly as a longer term solution. Um, Working at Santos, we know there's natural gas on the North Slope, but that's pretty far away from Anchorage. So we need to find a reliable way to get that down south and really take a look at that transportation matrix, where we're getting the gas from and where it needs to go to come up with the solution. If you're not familiar with Santos, the company is actually an Australian company who is primarily involved with LNG. They are the biggest supplier in Australia and surrounding regions, Papua New Guinea, New Zealand, the Pac Rim area. Um, so I've really got some experience recently on the logistics of getting LNG out of the ground, whether it's onshore, offshore, onto a ship, and out to where it needs to go. Lots of different options there. Again, we have to build up a matrix and take a look at what our best bet is. Um, but LNG short term, that's where our generation is really built. We can keep that going, but yeah, we're probably going to have to take a look at the rate that we're charging our members, and align that with the cost of the fuel itself. Again, that's short term. Long term, we really need to diversify the generation portfolio. Sure, the solar, hydro, that's going to be in the mix. If that's going to be a primary or not, again, we'll have to take a look at the cost matrix and see what really makes sense there. Um, Also taking a look at there's a lot of different options out there. Whether it is coal, biomass, there's nuclear options as well. I don't want to bring up plasma fusion because that's still a few years down the road, but.
That's a great long-term play. That's Michael McManamon, everybody, running for Chugach Electric Board of Directors with that answer. Todd Lindley, the other gentleman here on the Must Read Alaska podcast tonight. What say you about imported LNG and the thought process behind it?
Imported LNG is an interesting one, and I think right now, if I had to just tell you where my head is at, is we see all of the things in motion for import and export on LNG, and it almost appears like we've given up on Cook Inlet to a certain degree. And I think there for a while there was a lot of fears of what we actually believed was happening in the Cook Inlet. And what I found really interesting is nowhere in this question or anywhere else has anyone really talked about the fact that in November of 2025, Director Derek Nottingham of the Department of Oil and Gas came back and said, because of the new development that including Chugach and Hillcorp are doing at the Beluga River field, we've actually extended the supply gap of Cook Inlet. And like that's significant because it wasn't just a year before where everybody said, well, we're running out of gas because of the fears of contracts expiring and how all that is going. And so when I look at this question is one, when it comes to local gas, if you've got it right here coming from the producers, especially from the Beluga River field, is you're shoring up your own security for the source that provides the largest makeup of your portfolio. So Chugach Electric is over 80% reliant on natural gas. And then when you start looking at imports, the imports are a function of planning. We ought to be able to look at times like the January 2024 cold snap and say, what is the probability that we're going to need a certain amount of gas to be able to provide this buffer that I don't have in storage? I mean, now that we've got the flexibility with the Hillcorp storage facility, SINGSA seems to have fixed the well integrity issues that they had, which we need to be banking as much storage as we can while we can, and then looking at how do you plan that buffer of the gas that you might need in those cold snaps. So I think that's how we need to look at these things. And I know Chugach is trying to do this, and that's evident by the fact of the increased drilling that they've done over the last year. And like basically showing that we still have a ton of gas in the Cook Inlet. And that's not even talking about the work that Hex Fury is doing and then Hillcorp in general is doing in the Cook Inlet. So I think imported LNG is we're working towards a solution. It may not necessarily be what we need, especially if we're looking at the planning of how the dispatch is going to work for the use here in South Central. But it all kind of has to be which is going to be the most bang for the buck when you start looking at managing these fuel sources until we get to the point of a little bit more stability.
I cannot tell you that how many people I've talked to over the last year that are looking at the cost of everything going up, right, or going down in the rare case, and looking at a 50% increase on their electric bill and not puckering just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Uh, mine, because I have an 11-year-old, tends to be higher than it should be. 50% is significant, and so anything you guys can do once you get on the board will be a welcome addition to the to the take home expenditures that are going to be spent hopefully more
Mm-hmm.
wisely with you guys there. Gentlemen, let's talk about AEA and submarine transmission cables at Bradley Lake. In October 2023, the Alaska Energy Authority, led by Curtis Thayer, the AEA, was awarded a $206.5 million grant through the federal bipartisan infrastructure law to build a high voltage direct current HVDC submarine transmission cable between the Kenai Peninsula and Anchorage. Now, the award required an equivalent matching fund of $206.5 million non-federal funds. State legislators and other rail belt energy stakeholders have begun discussing potential sources of those matching funds, as well as the rationale for upgrades to the rail belt transmission system. What's your opinion on the need for new transmission in the rail belt and potential funding sources? What expertise do you have in this area? And then I'm going to add a quick question to that. What do you think of Bradley Lake? Gentlemen, Todd, let's start with you.
Yeah, so my opinion on new transmission is something that is a function of business development. And you're looking at ways of either connecting new residential areas or new commercial or industrial based customers, but right now we don't really have any of those things. And so now, other than maybe the residential, and that's kind of what this particular grant speaks to, is how do you connect Bradley Lake to places like the Valley, and be able to get cheap power to the place that's going to benefit the most. And so when we start looking at transmission is the, you know, for lack of a better term, for those that may know, but the master planning of it all. But we got to have some kind of a plan to go in to say, here's how we're going to connect it. What is the optimal transmission strategy for that? Because high voltage DC, we're talking about large amounts of energy in order to overcome the transmission losses. So bulk power transfer is kind of the DC component, whereas AC tends to be kind of the efficient transmission mechanism that we see in a lot of other areas. The other application with DC tends to favor a lot of the intermittent renewables. And so there's a component of this, and where I had misspoken the other night, thinking that this was the high voltage DC line that they were talking about probably a decade ago, connecting Fairbanks to the North Slope, where you had various different renewables kind of tied in along with that. But nonetheless, when we start looking at transmission, that's kind of the lens in which I think we have to look at it. So my expertise in this area is whenever I've done project development where we've got to connect power that we're using to run the facilities, we're looking at the transmission plans in order to make sure that we've got the most efficient way to move the power where it's needed most and for the amount of power that's going to be required at the other end.
Michael, thoughts on the HVDC line, the need for new transmission on the rail belt, funding sources for the match, and Bradley Lake overall?
Boy, Todd's not leaving me many talking points here. We do have to take
Ditto is always a good answer, by the way, but it's
short and to the point. Yeah, exactly. Why do we need this line? Who's going to be using that electricity? In general, yeah, we always need an expansion and reliability and a maintenance plan for our transmission lines. This one does add some redundancy to the circuits already in place that are going overland across poles and whatnot. But who is it really serving, and are they going to pay for it? Are there matching funds there? Do we have data centers and industrial facilities that are going to be going in and using this? Or are we going to have to spread that load and cost out across the residential base, which might be a little bit harder to swallow? Again, there's that subsidies word, but I hate to throw that one out there. We have a big chunk of change that we need to come up with for matching funds. There's a lot of people that do have interest in data centers, kind of because of the unique environment and um, excuse me, culture that Alaska has to offer here. There could potentially be some input there, but it is going to be a capital campaign that's going to take a while to hit that number. But if the line is necessary and there's significant customers for it, it might be worth the effort there. But in general, yeah, I do agree that we do need a maintenance plan and a growth plan for the transmission line. Alaska's big, and even though most of our residents are kind of concentrated in Anchorage here, we're spreading out a little bit. So need to make sure that we don't just have reliable generation. We need to get that electricity where it needs to go.
I don't think
all
we
right.
answered your question on Bradley, but
Oh,
if
Neither
I
one of you. I was actually going to go back and ask about that because neither one of you actually did. But I do want to get at least Bradley. So you guys both mentioned the other basically sources of demand, right? Let's talk about Bradley as a supply side, and let's talk about AI and data centers and other large manufacturing opportunities. I mean, Tara's talked about spinning off side businesses using its CCS. Is Alaska ready for data centers and the gigantic energy needs of those without long-term solutions like AKLNG?
so I'll take a first shot at this one.
Sure.
I think as it stands right now, we're a little bit behind the eight ball. And a lot of that is based on, we've been waiting for many years for this Alaska LNG to materialize into whatever it is going to be. Where we're at today is we've got Alaska LNG, we've got Terra Energy Coal, we've got all the Cook Inlet expanding, we've got any number of other major projects that are all kind of focused on this. And the Trump administration has been very clear that energy is national security, AI is the strategic objective. One way that I think we're different than other places in the lower 48 that are having this discussion right now is we have a lot of land where the data centers don't necessarily have to be sitting in the city center, like what they're talking about down in Ohio or in Texas or Florida for that matter, right? And so it's kind of the blessing and the curse of we've got a lot of land, we can figure out how to utilize this. But I think we have to kind of get our heads wrapped around it that you don't get one without the other. And if you're going to be a leader in AI, these are things that are just going to be a function of the business that's up here, kind of like coal was way back in the day, right? Is a lot of people weren't sure about coal, but it provided jobs, it afforded people the ability to feed their families. So how is this not going to be a similar type of an aspect? I think looking at Tara's perspective on spinning off other businesses, I mean that's kind of the way to go, and that's one way where Chugach I think can partner in is to find ways to look for equity and where we're kind of jointly contributing to a particular outcome because then it's going to benefit both ways. We move the project forward, we bring in big customers, big energy and manufacturing, and we now have a revenue source that potentially can benefit the ratepayers.
Michael, any thoughts on that?
absolutely. Todd mentioned Ohio. Well, at the new departure plant in Sandusky, A data center is going in now, and they have actually contracted out with Rolls-Royce to put in a 10 megawatt small modular reactor. So if you need a data center, there are options available. There's a time factor involved here. It's going to be 2030 before that reactor's even ready for deployment. Um, and yes, there are a lot of conversations going on about a nuclear reactor going in the middle of Sandusky, Ohio. That'll get the generation right where it needs to be, self-contained, um, fairly low carbon footprint. There is waste that we're going to have to deal with. I think Alaska is primed for data centers. We just need to make sure that we have the wherewithal to provide the generation and that transmission they need without having to reach out to third parties for electrical.
Gentlemen, we're almost out of time tonight on the Must Read Alaska podcast, but I want to ask one last question, then you guys give you guys a chance to wrap up. Let's think long term. The next 5 to 10 years, there are going to be challenges facing Chugach Electric. This is a board term of 3 years, but you're planning for the next 5 to 10. What are the biggest challenges facing the utility over those next 5 to 10 years? What can be done to prepare to meet them? And why are you uniquely qualified to step into that role and lead our electric association as a board member? You can wrap your closing answers into this along with that, or we can hit them separately. It's up to you guys. The floor is yours. We'll start with you, Michael.
All right. To roll these up, I really see the two biggest issues with that we need to address at the board level are affordability and reliability. The demand,
I'm
big picture.
clapping. I'm clapping in the background there, Michael. Good job.
We can really break these down and get into the nitty gritty and details, and we will. Really, we have to make sure that our product, electricity, is available whenever our consumers, the members of Chugach, need it, and that it is affordable, so that people don't go out and get their Teslas and try and go on their own with an unreliable solution. This is something that we can resolve and address and take a look at the planning going out, not just the next 3, 4 years, but let's make those plans going out decades. We have the AKLNG pipeline. There's also other resources available that we can leverage for generation. Um, uh, on the renewable front, as well as kind of the more traditional. Renewables have their challenges with reliability. We can supplement those with some of the more traditional methods that we have. A plan really can look out decades, leveraging the resources that we have here in Alaska.
Sounds good. Anything else for you, Todd? I know you're always as a planner. That's what you do. What say you?
So I agree with Michael. Affordability and reliability are kind of the two central questions that we're going to really have to grapple with over the next 5 to 10 years. And I don't think that you get affordability without looking at sources of energy like coal and hydro and nuclear and the vast gas resources that we have. And I put them in that term because I think when you're looking at dispatchable power, these are the sources that are going to be ready and they're going to be able to provide the source of redundancy that many of these operations are going to need. I mean, when you're looking at AI is a strategic national initiative for defense industry. They're not going to want just one source of power for a potential target. They're going to want to know that there's redundancy that is afforded to them when they're making these investments. And that's a different way of thinking about this, where traditionally we're like, well, I've got plenty of natural gas, no problem. But this is where the diversified portfolio standards and renewable portfolio standards is they fall on their face, because you're trying to regulate yourself into a strategic position where the utility and the board would need to be able to look at this and say, where does this investment make the most sense to meet the redundancy that will generate secure power for manufacturing, defense, data, whatever the case may be, because these things are coming. And I think when we're looking at that, it's gas storage. These are additional resources that we can look to develop to make sure that we've got that buffer. So when we're assessing what security looks like, you've given yourself enough flexibility to weather all seasons. I mean, you remember from the South Central Mayor's Technical Committee, we asked the question about the lessons learned from the Texas winter storm, and
Yep.
those are still open questions today. And that's unacceptable. We need to have a better plan for that, and to be able to respond, because Alaska has these severe seasons. So why I'm uniquely qualified to do this is, 17 years spent in the oil and gas industry, working on billion-dollar projects, delivering, multiple hundreds of thousands of barrels a day, same with millions of standard cubic feet of gas a day, and managing power. Like, all of these things have to work together in order to bring a valuable product to the market. And we have to take the same approach here at Chugach Electric, because if we don't solve the affordability price or the affordability component, it doesn't matter what we do. There's not going to be anybody here. And so I think looking at these things kind of clear-eyed, what's it going to cost? How is this actually going to move the needle? We need to make some very tough decisions, and it's going to be about eliminating distractions in order to get there.
Gentlemen, it has been a pleasure and honor to sit down with you guys tonight. Reminder, Michael McManamon, Todd Lindley running for the Chugach Electric Board of Directors. Ballots go out on April 29th. Look for them in your email and your mailbox. Voting continues through the annual meeting on May 29th. Starts with an open house that day from 1 to 4 p.m. at Change Point Church. And the annual meeting begins that evening at 5 o'clock. Election results, I believe, announced right at the end of that meeting. Gentlemen, anything else that you want to share with the Must Read Alaska podcast before we sign off for the night?
Please make the opportunity to get out there and vote. Make your voice heard, because it is going to impact the future.
Preach that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I second that. Get out there and vote.
All right, guys. Thank you again for taking the time tonight. It's been an honor to sit down with you. Must Read listeners, the show is yours now. You will get the ballot. Take advantage of it. Make sure we send rational, reasonable, responsible people to our electric utility board. And until those ballots come out, make sure that you give support to Michael and Todd, and then ultimately give them your vote starting on April 29th, going through May 29th. For all of us at Must Read Alaska, I appreciate the opportunity to host tonight, and we will say good night, everyone. Don't forget, Alaska is amazing because you help make it amazing, and Must Read Alaska will be there every step of the way, bringing incredible content here on the web. Good night, everybody.